I started off my career as a uranium analyst back in 2003, and it was a very exciting point in the cycle then, seeing the price go from $7 to $139 per pound over 3 or 4 years. But that was largely driven by supply interruptions. This time we're seeing on the flip side, we're seeing a huge emergence in terms of positive sentiment towards over nuclear power, and that's really driving an uptick in terms of demand. We're seeing that, particularly as it relates to, the positive sentiment by the Magnificent Seven companies as they look to power the data centers and really the rollout with nuclear power related facilities.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of CEO and Market Expert Interviews. I'm your host, Lucian. Some of you know me as Triangle Investor from social medias. Today, we are covering Nuclear Fuels Inc., a company advancing ISR projects to production in the United States. I'm joined by their CEO, Mr. Greg Huffmann. Greg, you are for the first time in my show, so great to have you to tell us more about nuclear fuels. Welcome, sir.
Lucian, thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for coming. Let's start with the current view of the uranium sector and where do you see it in the next 12 months?
Yeah, no, it's a great part to begin this interview with, because I think we even just recently we're seeing so much exciting news in terms of the demand side of the equation for uranium. Obviously, I've got a long history in the commodity space, majority of which is as a broker and salesperson, but I started off my career as a uranium analyst back in 2003, and it was a very exciting point in the cycle then, seeing the price go from $7 to $139 per pound over 3 or 4 years. But that was largely driven by supply interruptions. This time we're seeing on the flip side, we're seeing a huge emergence in terms of positive sentiment towards over nuclear power, and that's really driving an uptick in terms of demand. We're seeing that, particularly as it relates to the positive sentiment by the Magnificent Seven companies as they look to power the data centers and really the rollout with nuclear power related facilities, be it on SMRs recently with the Google announcement, Microsoft with the restart of 3 Mile Island. So it's just been a real inundation of positive news as it relates to the demand side of the equation from a uranium perspective on a go-forward basis, a lot of which hasn't been factored into the supply-demand models at the current stage. So there's very, very encouraging outlook as we've seen over the course of the last 3 or 4 months.
Great. What about uranium equities? How do you see them performing next?
Yeah, so I think, obviously with my previous job, we tracked a lot of the uranium equities very, very closely. And I see a very interesting time on a go-forward basis. I think valuations are at a very attractive level relative to the positive sentiment in the space. So I think that we really haven't seen the equities take off in a big way yet. And, that's really, I think, because a lot of the uranium equities historically have traded in line with the spot price, which had a big move about a year ago through the end of the year and into January, and then pulled back as some of the exuberance left the market over the course of the summer. The equities pulled back with it, but yet now we've seen sort of the uranium spot price start to oscillate. However, the uranium spot price is just such a small component of the overall market, with majority of volume being traded in the term market, which has continued to tick higher and higher and higher over the last 2 years. So yeah, I really think that at some point here we're going to see the uranium spot price start to move up more meaningfully. We've recently seen the Sprott Physical Uranium Trust be active back in the market, being able to issue equity under their ATM, which allows them to raise money to go into the spot market. They've been quite active here over the course of the last 2 weeks in terms of acquiring additional pounds. That really tightens up the spot market and really sets the price trajectory for spot higher, which I really think will help get the equities going here in between now and the end of the year.
Yeah, great. Greg, you had a big news release last week with NI 43-101 technical report for Kaycee project. If I remember correctly, it was stated in the report that the identified exploration target is up to 30 million pounds of uranium, which is looking really good. So please share us some details from the report. What does it actually mean for the next stage of the development?
Yeah, no, it was a really important catalyst for us. And oftentimes 43-101 reports, are not seen as a really newsworthy event for many companies. But for us, this one is, I'd argue that it is incredibly relevant. For our flagship Kaycee project, which is located in Wyoming along the western margin of the Powder River Basin. The Powder River Basin is a very important area for uranium production, both past and current restarts, with a number of operations that were on care and maintenance being restarted, in our immediate vicinity. The Kaycee project was really underexplored in that last 2003 to 2008 cycle, and that's really one of the things that intrigued me. The property never was consolidated under single ownership during last uranium cycle. However, there was quite a bit of work done for uranium exploration back in the 70s and into the early 80s. And so we're able to use a lot of that information to help guide our exploration. One thing that we're doing a bit differently, though, is we're really focused in on, exclusively on in-situ recovery uranium technology, and looking for deposits would be amenable to that. Whereas historically, back in the 70s and 80s, they were, targeting more conventional styles of mineralization. So, basically what happened is when I joined on, we wanted to update the 43-101 report using a consultant that's local to Wyoming, called WWC Engineering, which does a lot of the consulting work for the other companies operating in broader Wyoming in terms of in situ recovery uranium, as well as specifically within the Powder River Basin. They're very well, recommended, very extensive body of work over a number of years in the area. And when they went into detail in terms of our Kaycee project, based on the amount of historical work that had been done, they felt confident in terms of the updated 43-101 of putting an exploration target associated with the project. And that's really significant, something that we don't see as often in North America, but is done quite commonly in Australia. It is allowed under 43-101. We just don't see it as often, but we're starting to see it, more commonly used. So based on the geological work that have been done on the project historically, the work that we've done thus far, they felt comfortable in terms of delineating an exploration target on what they think that the project could host in terms of uranium mineralization. And that was a range of 11.5 million pounds to 30 million pounds, which for us, that range of target is very encouraging, because that's really, we think that something of at least 10 million pounds is what, the project could really, justify an economic operation from an in-situ recovery perspective.
That's definitely that is bringing value to the project. But what are you currently doing on the project now? Can you give me an update on the exploration activities at Kaycee?
Definitely. So yeah, the 43-101 was a really good building block, but we've been very active over the course of the summer with a drill program, which initially is focused on following up on some of the historical mineralization that have been identified on the project, and basically confirming that mineralization was there, and then really working to expand and extend those zones of historical mineralization, to sort of understand how extensively they had been explored in the past, and whether or not there was expansion potential from those. And we're very encouraged with the results that we've had both at the spur area as well as the saddle area, in terms of our ability to both drill within the resource envelope and return some higher grades, as well as extend that mineralization quite significantly along strike. So and to very encouraged that some of these historical zones may in fact link up, because you have to remember the project really wound down in the early 80s after 3 Mile Island, and basically lost its funding and hasn't seen any material exploration since that point. So we're really standing on the back of the work that was been done on in that time period, and working to expand and extend those existing zones. But then the also exciting part, based on the results of the 43-101 report that just came out, was the identification of a significantly expanded number of miles of roll front on the property. And the roll front is basically the geological feature that controls the mineralization. Previously, we had identified about 110 miles of roll front that was prospective on the property. As part of the review of the historical data, WWC was able to identify within the 43-101 report over 430 miles of potential roll front. So that gives us a lot of new areas to be able to go out and look for new zones of mineralization beyond the historical areas that have been delineated. In addition to that 430 miles of prospective roll front is limited to majority on the western portion of the project, which was the focus of the historical mineralization. We're also very excited about the potential for discoveries in the eastern part of the project, where there's been very little uranium exploration done historically, even back through the 70s and 80s. However, some of the oil and gas related exploration that's been done in the region showed that there could be significant uranium mineralization as well, and that's currently what we're working on following up on.
So what percentage of the property is actually explored in the history, in the past and now? If you can talk some percentages, rough percentages. Is there
Yes.
you said there is a room for growth, but what percentages of the projects are explored?
Yeah, so within the 43-101 report, the consultant said that only roughly 10% of the 430 miles of identified roll front have been explored with tightly spaced drilling. So for historical mineralization. So we're really encouraged by that. And really it was the extrapolation of the historical mineralized areas over the defined roll fronts, and then taking that over the broader property in terms of how the math that they used to come up with to estimate their exploration target for the property. And we're very encouraged that both the size of the potential target as well as the grades of the potential target and the depths is very similar to some of the regional operations that we're currently seeing being restarted. So we really think that one of the unique aspects of nuclear fuels, particularly at the Kaycee project, is the potential to make a new material uranium discovery that's amenable to ISR within the US, and particularly within Wyoming, which is important to note, is an agreement state, which really allows for much more rapid permitting, if we're able to be successful from an exploration perspective.
Understood. Winter is coming. You probably already think about the spring drilling as well, probably in some sort of preparation already. My question is, will it be a larger program than this one? Or do you
Yeah.
have any idea of the spring program?
Yeah, no, we're definitely starting the early stages. We're continuing to drill now, and we'll continue to drill here as long as the weather permits. We're very excited in terms of what we've seen so far in terms of the areas of historical mineralization. And as I mentioned, now we're out drilling in some areas that haven't seen a lot of exploration, particularly in the past. So yeah, that's very exciting. In terms of the program on a go forward basis, will be very much a dual pronged strategy with again continuing to expand and extend those historical zones of mineralization, also exploring the identified roll fronts that haven't seen a lot of closely spaced drilling, and then going to areas where there hasn't been very much drilling previously at all and trying to find new roll fronts with new areas of mineralization. So it'll really be a three-pronged strategy. So in order to accomplish that, we'll definitely look to have a larger program. We're in very good shape now in terms of one of the incredibly large drill notification permit from the Wyoming's Department of Environmental Quality, which allows us a lot of room to move around to drill on. And a significant event over the course of the summers is working with our local stakeholders in terms of the landowners in terms of assigning additional surface use agreements, which really opens us up to drill in it gives us surface access, drill in a number of areas where previously the company hasn't been able to. So those are two things that we've been really worked hard on over the course of the last 6 months, and are really excited to be able to ramp things up next year with a larger program.
I have to ask you this question. In the perfect world, how far is this project from production? I know it's too early to speak, but let's say, give me an approximate timeline of this project coming near production or in production.
Yeah, and it's a very common question that I get asked, and it's a bit challenging to answer because it is exploration. So right now we have a historical resource defined on the project of approximately 1.7 million pounds. We very much look to expand that up to at least that 10 million pounds, and ideally larger than that. Along the way, in terms of do the testing associated with the ISR amenability test work to make sure that it is sort of appropriate for to use that technology. In terms of looking to when we could get there, I think an important number to talk about is 15 million pounds. And that's because we do have a relationship with our parent company, enCore Energy. enCore Energy is our largest shareholder at 18.3%. They were the previous owner of the Kaycee project, as well as a number of other projects that when enCore pivoted to transition towards being a production company with the redevelopment of their two ISR assets in Texas. Nuclear Fuels was created by the spin out of those earlier stage ISR amenable projects to a separately listed company, which became Nuclear Fuels. That was really something that was important for us to talk about here today, because we continue to have a very close relationship with enCore. They own 18.3% of the equity in Nuclear Fuels. They also have the right to appoint 2 directors to the board, which they've exercised. They also have a back-in on our flagship Kaycee project, which is something that was really important for me to understand before I accepted this position, coming up on 4 months ago. And for me, it's an incredibly strategic aspect of the company, because in summary, enCore is able to reacquire a 51% stake in the project if we define that 15 million pound 43-101 compliant resource. That's a real relevant deposit in terms of Wyoming ISR projects. And to do that, they would need to pay us 2.5 times our exploration expenditures to that point, as well as provide the capex or the capital for our share of the capex on the 49% retained interest which Nuclear Fuels would hold. So, in terms of timing to get there, I think it's probably a couple of years of drilling on our part, but it's really important to note that all the money that we spend on Kaycee in that success scenario where they do back in for a 51% interest, we would be getting 2.5 times those exploration expenditures back in cash, as well as being carried to production for our 49% share of capex. Now, we would have to repay that out of cash flows on a go-forward basis, but for us, from a mitigating dilution perspective, and from being able to leverage the technical capabilities of enCore, which is the only company with 2 producing ISR uranium assets in the United States, it's incredibly relevant and incredibly important from a Nuclear Fuels share price perspective.
enCore is a great partner to have. Definitely some of the best guys, some of the best people out there, some of the best projects out there. Please expand a bit on the enCore Energy cooperation. How is that cooperation going? On what process works do they help you the most?
Yeah, and it's a great question, and it's something that for me was very important in my decision to join Nuclear Fuels as the CEO. I've worked with the enCore team in my previous role quite extensively, and got to know them very well. I've been down to visit both operations in Texas, Rosita, as well as the larger Alta Mesa project a number of times. But even if I take a step further back to the predecessor company, of which Bill Sheriff was also the founder and chairman, is Energy Corp. Back in when I started off as a uranium analyst, we did quite a bit of work together back in 2004 through 2008, before he sold the company to Uranium One. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for the work that Bill and his team do from a data compilation and then property compilation perspective. And they've taken that over to enCore, but then layered in the production expertise with the enCore CEO, Paul Goranson. And he's been able to execute very well in terms of the restart of both the Rosita operation and more recently the Alta Mesa operation, both ISR production facilities in Texas. And probably very significantly in a tough labor market with very little expertise out there in the ISR uranium space, build up probably what is one of the best teams outside of Kazakhstan in terms of ISR capability. And it's phenomenal to have that technical team from Paul Goranson right through his geological staff, through his engineering staff, through his process staff, to be able to call them up and leverage their knowledge and their capability and their experience in terms of what we're doing, albeit on a much earlier stage. But it's a very, very useful and helpful tool for us to have that expertise, not in-house, but one phone call away from our parent company.
That is great. You mentioned enCore has an option to earn 51% at Kaycee. In that scenario, if they exercise that right, what is that changing for you in the terms of financing and future work?
Yeah, I think it's for us, it's maybe I'll answer in two parts. The first part is getting there. So for us, we want to stay aggressive in terms of exploration, which means us staying active in terms of drilling. Both you trying to extend and expand the historical deposits, but it's also drill for new discoveries. So try to grow that potential resource on the property, which we felt very confident that I'm happy that WWC, a very well respected consultancy in Wyoming, focused in Wyoming, thought that there was the potential for that 11.5 to 30 million pounds, which gets us into that realm of being able to exercise that trigger. In terms of a go forward basis, if we are successful in defining that 15 million pound 43-101 compliant resource, and enCore did choose to exercise that back in, we would end up with a very, very robust treasury. And so it's important for us to keep a significant portfolio of other projects. And the lens with which we look at those is basically, uranium projects in the U.S. That are ISR amenable with a preference towards agreement states from an ease of permitting perspective. So I'd highlight our Boot Heel project, also located in Wyoming, but within the Shirley Basin rather than the Powder River Basin. It had significant amount of work done last cycle, to the point where it was, the permitting had started for it, with the NRC at the time. That's something that we're going to look to have a drill program on next summer. And very excited about the potential of that project. And then we're very active in terms of being on the lookout for additional properties to bring in the portfolio, because on that success scenario where enCore does back in for 51% interest in Kaycee, we definitely want to be able to use that cash that we'll have on the balance sheet to advance and explore the next project that could become a future uranium producer in the US. That's really very much what our focus is.
Besides Wyoming, you have a project in Arizona, Moonshine is the name, I believe. What are you currently doing over there, and what are the next steps for that project?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a project that we're very excited about. There's quite good grades there. There is a historical resource. So we're working on bringing that historical resource into 43-101 compliance. But we're also excited about the fact that there's some additional data. One of the advantages of being part of the enCore group is really having access to a very wide network of historical data, both owned by enCore as well as our chairman, William Sheriff. So we're able to leverage that data and know what's out there. So there's some additional data that we're working on acquiring, that would help potentially grow that historical resource at Moonshine, and could potentially help us understand how to explore that project better on a go forward basis.
You have one other project in Wyoming. It's not your core project, Bobcat uranium project. Are you currently doing something over there?
Yeah, and so Bobcat's one that we haven't spent a lot of time on since I've joined on, coming up on 4 months ago. So it's something that over the course of the winter we'll do some more desktop work in terms of understanding what's there. But then I think also is going to be really interesting to see what else comes into the portfolio in the intervening time, because it's something that we're quite actively focused on. So while we're very happy with our portfolio as it currently stands, we're always on the lookout for additional projects to bring in. It's something that investors should watch for us over the coming months.
Right. Wyoming is definitely becoming hot when it comes to uranium production and exploration, with restarts and exploration activities really speeding up. How is your experience of doing business in Wyoming, and do you have any problems of finding the workforce and skilled labor for your exploration activities?
Yeah, it's been incredibly refreshing. Obviously my previous job, worked with companies operating in many different jurisdictions. And one of the things when I was, evaluating the opportunity was the jurisdiction. First of all, I think maybe take a step back. I think, from a uranium perspective, the US is incredibly well endowed geologically, to the point where in the 70s, the US was self-sufficient from a uranium production perspective. So you do have the right geology. When the uranium price is at a sufficient level, the US can produce a lot of uranium. So that was one thing that really sort of attracted me to the opportunity. Second of all, sort of zooming in the state of Wyoming, obviously we've talked about it being an agreement state. We've talked about the potential for the Powder River Basin, and it's very relevant. I think right now, from a state perspective, there's one currently producing ISR operation in the state of Wyoming. If we fast forward a year from now, we'll have 3 additional ISR operations that are scheduled to come back into production, All three of those are located within the Powder River Basin where our Kaycee project is located. So I think it's the right geology. In terms of the support, I'd say we have an incredible level of support from at the local government level within the town of Kaycee. We have great contacts within the state government, and we're recently joined the Wyoming Mining Association, which we're very proud to be a member of, and that provides great resources as well at the state level. In terms of permitting, you're looking at when you start the permitting process, a 3-year path legislated by the state of Wyoming to get things permitted. So that's a very important aspect as well. And then I think from accessing labor, Wyoming as a state, and specifically the Powder River Basin, historically has been a very large thermal coal producer. And as thermal coal really sort of transitions away, there's the state is very much focused on transitioning both the labor force as well as the tax revenue pool towards other sources, in particular uranium. So I think there's a really good opportunity there for state level support and to access personnel. We're at the much earlier stage right now. Obviously, we're just we're drilling. We are able to source rigs fairly easily. Drill crews is a little bit tougher, but we've got great relationships within the state because of the work that enCore has done on their projects historically. So we're able to leverage that to be able to get very good crews, and we've been incredibly impressed with our drill contractors thus far.
Okay, you mentioned M&A, that you are open for M&A, but would you consider conventional projects, or you are just ISR focused company? And actually, my other part of the question, would you focus on some other jurisdiction besides the United States, the Wyoming or surrounding states? What's your take on that?
Yeah, no, and it's a good question. I think it's from a strategy perspective at Nuclear Fuels, we are very much focused on ISR amenable deposits in the United States with a preference for agreement states, particularly. So that's something where I think a lot of companies have diversified strategies in terms of going to multiple jurisdictions. For us, it's really important to stay focused. We want to be seen as sort of the go-to from a US ISR uranium perspective when people are looking for someone earlier stage on the Lassonde curve, where you want that torque to discovery. That's something I think there's fantastic companies operating exploration programs in the Athabasca Basin, in the other Proterozoic basins in Canada as well as elsewhere. We really think that the U.S. provides a great opportunity for us to, first of all, make a discovery that can be economic, and then bring that discovery to production in a very, very rapid time frame, which really sets the U.S. apart, particularly with the government support that we've got at the state level and even at the federal level in terms of really bipartisan pushes to reestablish a domestic nuclear fuel supply chain within the U.S. Obviously, starting at the enrichment end of the spectrum, but working back towards the mine mouth. So I really think that there's, for us, the U.S. is going to be the focus on a go-forward basis, and definitely stay focused on ISR, simply because that's where our expertise lies, from exploration and then right through to development and production as being, with our parent company, enCore.
Yeah, I saw the press release last week. You have a new addition on the board of the directors, Mr. Bram. I forgot the last name. It's German, last name, if I'm correct. Bram has a financing background, right?
Yes, that's correct. And thanks for bringing it up, because obviously that's something that I think for us was a very exciting moment when Bram decided to join the board. So Bram was in my former role as a global head of mining sales at an independent brokerage firm for the last 8 years. Bram was one of my long-term clients, even going back to when I was a uranium analyst. Bram's worked for over 20 years with RBC Asset Management out of Toronto as their co-portfolio manager on their resource funds, both on the mining side as well as the oil and gas. He brings an incredible level of experience, having met with thousands upon thousands of companies over his career. and really work closely with the companies in which they were invested with from a strategy perspective, from a corporate governance perspective, from a board perspective, from an M&A perspective. So when Bram retired in the spring, and I was moving to start with Nuclear Fuels, it was a great hope of mine that I could get someone of his caliber to join on to our board. And so we worked with Bram, quite extensively. He does a lot of due diligence, and when he looked at his investments, as a portfolio manager, and he took even more, as much or more rigor before putting his name forward to join our board. So we're thrilled to have Bram. We think he's going to be a great addition. It's the only board that he's on at this point. And Bram stated that it will be the only small cap board that he's joining. And so we're thrilled to be the one that he picked to move forward with. And he's, because he's staying very focused. He's already been a huge contributor and a very, very active member of the board. Had a number of calls with him, over the course of, since his appointment. And yes, it, turned a lot of heads because he is so well known in terms of the resource sector as one of the preeminent investors. So we're very, very happy and very excited to have Bram as part of the team.
Yeah, he will help you with the financial part, definitely. How is actually your financial plan looking ahead? How much money do you have in the till right now, currently, and what's the plan?
Yeah, we've got a couple of $1 million in the bank. That's very much sufficient to execute our current drill program. But obviously, we're in the business of exploration, spending money. And again, as I mentioned before, we very much want to stay aggressive in terms of the exploration programs on a go-forward basis, particularly into next year, as we get a very good handle in terms of what the potential of Kaycee is, as well as the other projects within our portfolio. So, and particularly with the structure of the Kaycee back-in arrangement with enCore, there's a real opportunity there for us to, if they do decide to back in, that we get the money that we spend at Kaycee back 2.5 times over. So it's a real investment in terms of the future of the company here. So yeah, we're going to definitely stay aggressive from an exploration perspective, and we'll be opportunistic in terms of when we come to market. We're very excited with the improving sort of tailwinds that we're seeing, more broadly from a macro perspective as it relates to nuclear power and specifically the uranium price on a go-forward basis.
Okay, how do you approach marketing? You have great projects in the pipeline, great people, but I'm under the impression that the word is not spread enough, that there are still people in the space that are not fully familiar with the story. I could be wrong, that's my impression, but what are you doing with marketing to tell the story, let's say, better?
I think it's a very, very accurate assessment of the company. I think that was a real opportunity that I saw when I was evaluating the potentially joining the company, is that Nuclear Fuels is not well known out there. Obviously, it's a smaller market capitalization company, but it's something where I really thought that even looking at sort of similar peer companies, that it was incredibly undervalued relative to those other companies. So and not for any reason except that it was not that well known. So that was something that I really thought that, given my background in institutional sales, focused on the resource sector for the majority of the past 20 years, and my network of institutional high net worth, wealth management and retail contacts, that we could really try to increase the profile of Nuclear Fuels. And so that's something we've been very focused on over the course of the last 4 months since I've been with the company. We've done hundreds of meetings already with institutional investors, as well as many with high net worth individuals as well. But really, trying to get the name familiarity out there, and announcements like we had last week of a new and updated 43-101 report with the exploration target defined within it. The announcement of Bram Spilfogo, a very prominent investor, joining the board. We're really trying to do as much as we can to get the story out there, and appreciate the work that you do to help with that as well. So we're definitely not everyone knows about Nuclear Fuels at this point, but trust me, 6 months from now they will.
Fair enough. Tell me more about your share structure, share registry. I know that you have skin in the game. I'm reading the filings, so I know that you have more than 3% or something like that. The board has something like 7%. But do you have any other bigger names in the registry, or is it just a retail story?
Yeah, I'd say, obviously our largest shareholder is our parent company, enCore Energy. They own 18.3%. And for me, I guess, when I was, contemplating joining, one of the things that was really important to me was to be fully aligned with shareholders. So when I did join, one of the conditions was that I was able to do a private placement into the company myself. Invested $700,000 Canadian of my own money into the company, which was quite well received by both existing shareholders as well as a number of the institutional contacts that I have, and saying, "Wow, not only is Greg leaving a pretty good job on Bay Street that he's had for a number of years, and moving into a small cap company, but he's writing a significant check as well." And that's just important. I think it's something that, we should be more demanding of a lot of the executives within our companies, that they do put their own dollars into the company. In terms of, the rest of the board, I expect to see, the ownership at the board level increase here, as we move forward and get some more news out, and move out of blackout. And I'd also say that, from having Bram Spilfogel not only join the board, but also do his own private placement into the company as well, for $100,000 approximately. So, I think it's something that, we're starting to see, it needs to improve in terms of overall, management and board participation, and to have that alignment with shareholders. In terms of other institutions, I'd say there are some, but really the size of the company, it sort of limits, a lot of the funds, from participating when it's a smaller market capitalization company. But we don't expect that to persist for very long. There are some funds that do specialize in small cap and/or uranium investing that do have small positions, but we're really excited to grow that number of institutional investors here on a go-forward basis as we grow the company.
Okay. Final question, Greg. Newsflow from the company. What and when can investors expect in the terms of newsflow, let's say in the next 3-4 months?
Absolutely. So we've been quite active, in terms of drill program over the course of the summer. We've had a couple press releases summarizing the drill results as of the end of July. So we've got, more results coming for August and September, that we're quite excited about to get out into the market. We also had our 43-101 report out last week, as well as the announcement of Bram joining the board. So those were two big events. And then I'd also say keep eyes open for potential acquisitions, at the project level to sort of build out that property portfolio. Those are really sort of the main drivers that we're looking at. We'll also continue to look to grow our team. So you may see some announcements on that from that perspective as well, because really we want to make sure that we're the preeminent exploration company for ISR uranium assets in the States, and we want to make sure we have the best possible team to be able to execute on that.
Okay, that was Mr. Greg Huffmann, Nuclear Fuels Inc. CEO. Greg, thank you for coming to my show. I wish you luck with all your projects.
Lucian, thank you so much for the opportunity. Look forward to keeping you and your investors updated.